Welcome to Kettlebell Corner, where strength meets theory, where we take you on a deeper dive into all things kettlebells. I'm Jeremiah Waylon, and he's Roger Parks. And then today, we're going to teach you how to manipulate energy to influence your training goals. Not all energy, not all goals. But what are we talking about, Roger? What's up? How can we influence energy?
Well, we got a question, didn't we? We got a question.
Yeah, we got a question. You can send us questions too in the comments or the send a text feature. We'll answer it just like this.
This question specifically was on OverSpeed Eccentrics, and with and without a band. I don't know how much we can really go into that, so we figured we'd broaden it and we'll talk about energy in general. Because once you understand the way energy works, some basic guidelines, some rules, the phases of the swing, you can start manipulating these things to implement any goal. If you understand energy, you understand your goals, then you can just plug and play, cut and paste, and you don't need us to tell you what to do.
All right. Well, let's answer a couple of questions. And I think this is going to give people a good framework to go on and decide if this OverSpeed Eccentric is good for them and how to accomplish it. So number one, Roger, I want to know, how does emphasizing the eccentric phase of a swing, aka the down portion, influence and benefit our training? What are we doing with that in the first place? So can you talk a little bit about what it is?
I can, but let me make a few terms clear for people. This is a specialized technique, and this is coach speak. So I want to make sure that people who aren't familiar with these words really understand it. With exercises, we look at a working portion and a relaxing portion. It's really not a relaxing portion because you're still resisting. Some people think of it as an up and a down. Generally speaking, when you are bringing joints closer to standing, in this case, it is the concentric portion. So when you're bringing them farther apart, it's the eccentric. So let's say you're doing a squat. When you're lowering into the squat, that would be the eccentric portion. That's when you're moving closer to the ground. The concentric portion would be when you're moving away from the ground. So you can also look at it in terms of force production. Concentric is when you're generating force, and eccentric is when you're accepting force. So, the classic paradigm with concentric and eccentric with things relaxing is a little bit misleading, because again, you're not relaxing. Your muscles are always working. It's not as though you just, go limp.
You fall into a heap on the ground.
Exactly.
Everything stopped, coach.
It doesn't work that way. At least it shouldn't, not ideally. And if it does, then you need to seek medical help. So that's the portion of the swing we're talking about specifically. So it would be the down portion. Imagine you've done a full cycle of a full swing. It's up in the float. Now you've got to bring the bell back down. Okay. So you're going from that vertical plank, fully standing, all the way into the backswing. So this is the eccentric portion. Overspeed means that you are bringing the bell down faster than you normally would. You have an option once you get to that top portion. You can let gravity do what it does, and it's going to, as soon as the energy from the concentric portion of the swing has dissipated, it's going to hover there just for a quick second, or less than a second, quick moment, and then it's going to move down into the eccentric portion. So you can let that happen, or you can give it a little extra. So what we're talking about here is the extra. Are we actively pulling the bell down? Are we using a band to pull it down? Or there's another technique that I actually prefer, which is great if you have a partner, called the spike swing. We'll get into what those are. So let's make sure we get those terms down correctly. So now, what was the question again?
All right, that pretty much answered the question. So just by identifying the terms, Roger, you've provided solutions. So let's talk about some of the benefits of that eccentric phase. What are the benefits of speeding that up, and how will that help somebody in their training?
It's important that you phrase it exactly the way you phrased it, because kettlebell swings do have an eccentric portion, and it's going to be different than the let's just use the term speed of other movements, other exercises. You're going to move back into the backswing of a kettlebell swing faster than you're going to move into, let's say, a deadlift or a squat. You can have specific examples where you're doing something that's ballistic, so like a jump squat, for example. That's possible, but I want to point out that you're already moving faster than you normally move. So just by choosing a kettlebell swing, you are getting some of these benefits. So the question is, what benefit does speeding it up give you? It will, as we get into energy later, and you'll see, it'll make things harder. It will increase the force production. Okay. So when there is more force moving into the backswing, there's more force you need to stabilize. In my mind, I think about accepting. You have to accept force. That doesn't mean that you get bowled over. But if you have, let's say, football is a common sport, American football, wrestling, for example.
Well said, Roger. We're breaking news here.
Grappling, things like this. When you have two bodies colliding, you have the option of what to do with force. And in some situations, you may want to try to meet force with force. So if I think I can overpower somebody, I may not yield to that force or back up or accept it. I may try to fight it,
resist.
Right? But in some cases, I may want to go with it. Maybe if someone's trying to shoot in and knock me over, I might accept that force and redirect it and try to throw them the opposite way.
Like a sprawl or something, or the judo toss or whatever.
Something like that. So, I don't want to get too much into what specific goals it might be good for, but I do want to call out that it's when this needs to happen faster than normal. That's when you're going to need it. Let's say you are, I guess a good example would be volleyball. There have been studies done with volleyball and the kettlebell, and it's helped jumping. So let's say you have a hard time generating force and jumping quickly. Basketball would probably be an even better example. So let's say you and I, Jeremiah, we're identical in height. Okay.
Yeah.
Same
great.
Haircut and everything.
Whose height first? First of all, whose height?
Yours.
Okay.
You don't want to be
it's
my
basketball height. Right away.
So
that's why I wanted clarification.
So we're both your height, and we have the same. We have the ability to jump the same height. Okay, everything's identical except for the time it takes for one of us to jump. Okay, so let's say I'm getting to the ball first because I can get down and load up my jump faster than you can. You may want to work a little bit on that loading and unloading, or unloading and loading, so to speak. You may want to get better at accepting force or yielding down to gravity, right? So going closer to the floor and then bouncing back up. An OverSpeed Eccentric would be something worth playing with. I haven't done it. I don't know if it would work, but this is what we're talking about, a situation where you need to change levels pretty quickly and then go back the other way. So let's say, theoretically, one of us is tired, the other one always winning. So let's say I'm getting to the ball, you go home and you're doing some OverSpeed Eccentrics. Next week, we meet up to play basketball. You're getting to the ball before me because you can get down into the jump and out of the jump faster than I can. You win, I cry. You're
OverSpeed Eccentrics saved everything about my life.
Exactly right. So individual goal is less important than understanding that this is going to be a technique where you're really emphasizing dealing with force.
Yeah. So the greater picture of it is more, you're able to, I don't want to say change directions, but you can take and give faster.
Sure.
Right? You can take faster and give faster. So whatever that applies to you. I like the football example as a good example because oftentimes in the line, there are two forces going against each other.
Mm-hmm. Now, something to think about too is the more force you move down. Okay, we have to talk too about later about when a kettlebell is actually heavy, when you're going to accept force and when it's just kind of, hovering somewhere between the top of the swing and bottom. But anytime you're putting more force down, we've got to think of Newton's third law, which is the whole equal and opposite thing. The magnitude of the force that comes down into me is force I need to stabilize. My legs need to fight harder to keep that bell from collapsing me. So there is also a muscular benefit in that's going to make my muscles work harder. It's going to make me burn more calories. A few things will happen there. So we want to focus on that. One other thing that we do need to call out where this is particularly useful is with people who are newer to kettlebells, believe it or not. What often happens as people get to the top of the swing, they're going through and they get a little float. They will break back a little bit too soon in the backswing. They're not really good about preserving their energy and really controlling it. And one thing that I've found is helpful is to tell people to pull the bell down, pull it down faster. When that happens, their body intuitively responds. They get a little bit of elasticity. They get snappier. And then the swing, usually you get a look like, whoa, what just happened? I didn't feel really anything. The swing just kind of happened on its own. And that's one of the things that we're after. So those are going to be the broad strokes reasons why you might want to do that. So
yeah, and I'll second that too. If you're somebody who's beginning and your timing is off, try that tug. That's something you can just take right now within the first 10 minutes, and that might fix up your timing. And the kettlebell swing is going right when it happens really fast, essentially. Mm-hmm. Once that bell hits your body, you're already turning around. It just happens in a matter of split seconds. And if it takes longer than that, if it doesn't feel super fast, then your timing is probably off.
I do want to make one note about this, though, is that these are challenging. This is not something that you should do with every
first
swing.
Day. Yeah.
You can use it sparingly to learn technique, but yeah, this is something that can be really challenging. It's going to burn a lot of calories. It's going to tax your muscles. It's going to tax your nervous system. So don't come away from this thinking that all of your swings should be this way. In fact, I found the most benefit with being able to modulate my swings, different speeds. You can measure that with a stopwatch. I've used a metronome before, which is kind of fun. Playing with different paces, different heights. Different heights are great to observe how much force you're putting into the bell. So these are all ways that you can play with energy. And this is another one. Just don't do it all the time.
Yeah. So let's talk about the energy in the swing, since you mentioned, the height of the bell and these sort of things. We have a couple types of energies that you had shared with me. One of them being a chemical / kinetic energy. And you believe you've paraphrased this as motion. Well, what do we mean by this type of energy? What is this that you're talking about?
Well, so just to be clear, kinetic energy and chemical energy are different, but I put them together because motion is going to be caused by you. That once the body. Exactly right. Once the bell is up to let's say the top of the swing and it's about to fall down, then it becomes potential energy. It's a different thing. So let's look at a general swing. Let's look at the cycle. So the bell's on the floor in the hike position. You need to get the bell moving. You need to bring it from the floor in front of you up into the back of the hike position. Overcoming
inertia, right?
Yeah, you got that right, buddy. you need to overcome
the last
inertia.
Episode, you know.
So yes, you need to overcome inertia, and you need force.
Sorry for the derail.
You need force to do that, and that force is going to come from the chemical energy that you've consumed in your food. We're not going to get into bioenergetics and all of that stuff because that's not what we're talking about here. So you need to create some motion, and you're going to do that by using your chemical energy, and that's what you're going to get at one point from food. So you're going to bring the bell up into the hike position, and you may let it drop a tiny bit, and I'm talking about a split second of a split second to use a little bit of potential energy, but not more than that, because if you do that, your arms are going to separate from your body, and you don't want to do that. So once you get that bell up into the hike position, something interesting is going to happen, and that's going to be, you're going to have a compound effect. One is you're going to get what's called elastic potential energy. I've also heard this called strain energy. And when we look at our soft tissues, they're it's a poor analogy, but think of rubber bands. There is elasticity there. When you take the extra mass from the bell and you shove it up basically into your groin, the tissues are going to respond. They're going to deform or change length. That's going to happen naturally, automatically. When they deform, they want to fight to get back to their original shape. There's going to be some energy released there. So just think about pulling a rubber band back. Another thing that's going to happen is something called the stretch shortening cycle. Stretch shortening cycle is what happens when we stretch muscles abruptly, which is why if you are working some sort of static stretching program, you want to make sure that you're not bouncing into these stretches, because that will tighten things up rather than loosen them up, assuming that's your goal. And you also need to give that time to happen, right? But when you have a quick stretch, what happens is the muscles fire, they contract. So you get that bell in the backswing, you get a little bit of elastic potential energy from your tissues deforming, wanting to get back to their normal length. You're going to get the stretch shortening cycle. This is a fantastic time to drive your legs, which is going to be more chemical energy that's going to create kinetic energy of motion. So what you're really doing is you're stacking energy on energy on energy. So we go through, we drive our feet all the way down into the floor. The arms are still attached to the body. We're standing up. We're in the standing plank. And that's when you're going to see this kinetic energy, right? You've used all the chemical energy. right, to get to standing. And at which point your arms are going to come loose. That's when you're going to see that energy of motion, the kinetic energy. Now, you
moves
have
the bell away from you, right?
Exactly right. Yeah. So you have used your chemical energy to make that happen, but it doesn't manifest until your body is still. It does a little bit. Obviously, the bell has to move from the backswing to the standing plank, but you can look at a completely separate phase once the bell starts to separate from you. Right. So you've got that kinetic energy that's going to go from the standing plank all the way up into the float. You're going to have that moment, right, where it hovers, which we call the float, proof that the bell got ballistic or it accelerated up faster than gravity could bring it down. Once it's at that top, the peak of the swing, it has its maximum potential energy. And potential energy is really just the opposite of that kinetic energy. You've done what we call in physics work. It's really just about using force to displace the bell. So we've done work on the bell. Now that kinetic energy has stopped, and now it's going to reverse and become potential energy. The higher you get the bell, the more potential energy your swing is going to have. This is one reason too, you might want to think about getting out of this pattern of only swinging to chest level. If you let that bell go above your neck, even up above your head, not straight overhead, but up to the level of your forehead, arms are straight, you're going to put you're putting more energy into the swing. And as that bell drops, it's going to be able to accelerate more. Acceleration means more force. So just by letting the bell swing higher, you're going to modulate this training effect. You are going to increase the amount of force that you're going to experience during the eccentric without even having to pull it down.
Without even having to push or pull or use a band or anything. So let's call that the poor man's way. Just work harder, right?
Sure. So
work harder, let that bell go higher, save that chest level for the cert.
Yep. So now we have the bell moving back down so that potential energy is becoming kinetic energy, right? Now we have more energy in motion. Okay. So that's going to happen until the arms reconnect to the body. And this is the phase really that's in question. And we're going to get back to that. But once the arms reconnect to the body, you're pulling the hips back, right? You're actively pulling into the backswing. And that is using more chemical energy to do that. And that is eliciting more elastic potential energy or more strain energy. Plus you're going to get the stretch shortening cycle again. The cycle is going to repeat. Now, what we're really looking at is the portion between the float and when the bell makes contact with your body again. Now, during that phase, you have the option of using the lats, kind of making like this swimming motion. Imagine that your arms are straight up above your head, and you're going to use your lat muscles, among others, to bring the arms back down into the body. That's that shoulder, from that position, that would be shoulder extension. Okay. Bringing it closer to the midline. That is going to accelerate the bell, make it go faster. More acceleration means more force. More force means you're going to have more force moving down.
Reactions.
All of that stuff. Okay. More energy, more force. And that's when you're going to get into the potential good things we talked about in the beginning, why you might want to do these to begin with. So
got it.
What we're looking at is you want to manage your energy during the swing. There's a portion we talk about called the turnaround, which is the moment right at the back of the backswing, just before you're about to go into another swing. One thing you'll see commonly is the bell will flip up, or there will be a little bit of a lag. It'll drop too much before you start going. So that's energy being wasted. And you want to think that, energy within the system, theoretically, not actually, but theoretically is going to be conserved, meaning the amount that you put into it is going to stay within that system back and forth and back and forth. So you want to be as careful with that energy as possible. One thing I like to think about is 2 cups, and there's water in it, and you're spilling the water back and forth between the cups. And if you do this the right way, then you're not going to be making a mess on the floor. Right? All the energy that you have on the way up is the energy you're going to have on the way down, and vice versa. There's going to be evaporation, just like there is with water passing between cups. So some of the energy is going to get into the world around you. But the better you are at holding your position, about timing the things like the turnaround, about stacking all the energy. Some people, when they get to the back, they want to stand up too soon. They don't let the stretch happen. That messes up the energy. This is an important concept, energy management, and it does take some time and attention to get. But when you learn how to manage that energy more effectively, not only are you going to be able to fight off fatigue better, but you're going to be able to use the swing or whatever ballistic lift you want in order to elicit a specific training effect for a specific.
Good. Yeah. So just make sure, like I forgot how you phrased it, but it was basically standing in there ready to absorb. You got to stand in there longer for that. So you spend enough time getting the stretch shortened to drive it up there. Now you're standing, it's doing its thing. The potential energy is coming back, being like in that standing plank for longer, essentially, right? That's all you have to do. If you break that too soon, you're going to have a bigger energy leak and water's all over the floor.
Sure. It's the standing plank, and it's also in the back. There's something, you look at, if you look at plyometrics, there's a phase called the amortization phase. And that's when all these energies are kind of at their highest point. If you don't let them get to the highest point, you're never going to get to the highest point. You're going to have less energy. If you wait too long, that energy will dissipate. So you can swing that bell as hard as you want on the way down, but if you wait too long to turn it around and go back the other way, you've still
it'll kind of just fall
something
to the floor, basically, right? You'll
yeah,
separate the arms from the body.
Yes, either that or your next swing will be almost all legs, and you're not going to have that extra energy to help you out. So, you want to think about timing is really important when you're doing these things, because if you're creating all of this extra energy, it's got to be for a purpose, and you need to get the timing down right. Unless you are not interested at all in your concentric, your way up, and you just want to do a dead stop swing and then really yank it down and accept that load. If that's all it is, you don't need to necessarily go up. And that would be a really inefficient way to train. Well, inefficient in that it's going to take a lot of energy. And sometimes we want inefficient, right?
Yeah.
Efficiency
when things get hard.
Exactly right. So a dead stop swing is a very inefficient way to swing. You don't have all of the energy from the top of the swing to help you get your next swing up, which is why I think the estimate was like they require something like 30% more energy. I might be making that up, but someone tested it allegedly. At least
and you said it on the internet, so it's true.
Yeah, well, it's got to be true. Someone tested it at some point, and it's harder. And anecdotally, it's harder. So, we're really, like I said, we're thinking about energy management. So just think about that, those cups of water passing by.
All right. So that covers the energy part. And essentially these OverSpeed Eccentrics, they're going to teach us how to handle force during that portion of the swing, which is that down phase. Help us get used to turning that around, absorbing it and turning it around to be used over and over again.
Sure. And some of these, just look at force and energy as the same. This isn't a physics lesson. These things are not the same.
Yeah.
The reason why I bring up forces is forces are the things that your body has to experience. When your body experiences force, that force is often experienced, like we would just call it weight, right? Which is kind of imprecise. What we're really doing is when we're moving things, we're manipulating forces. Our body has to respond to those forces, and that's where we get a training benefit. So,
and that sounds like a Rage Against the Machine song. And then these OverSpeed Eccentrics, like you said, they're going to create more elasticity in that backswing portion, potentially making that first initial leg drive easier, the upswing, the up portion, the concentric aspect easier, because you have all that extra energy.
Yes, and assuming you're ready for them. Another thing people don't really think about with things like this, and I think this may have even been a comment on our kettlebell clickbait episode. Mm-hmm. And sometimes people will throw that out as like, oh, this is what you need. You got to be ready for that. If your tissues don't elongate, right, and you still need to get into the backswing and you need to do it faster, something else has to change. That's where we get our common, fitness term compensation. That's not what you want. You don't want to train yourself into a problem. So if you are going to be doing these OverSpeed Eccentrics, make sure that you have full range of motion. Make sure that you can get into a normal swing well, and you've done a bunch of those normal swings, so you don't run into any trouble.
These are hardcore, everybody. I don't know if we got to paint this picture any different for you. This is a bell coming at your groin, as Roger put it, as fast as possible. And then finally, it's especially helpful for people to help find their spring in the swing. Like if you're beginning and you just, if you can't get that pop well enough, or maybe your timing is off, it's kind of useful for that as well.
Sure, you can feel it when you really accentuate the force down. You can feel if you're dragging, if you're too soft in the backswing, for sure.
All right, there's a couple ways to do this, Roger. You mentioned one of them, bands, son, bands to make them dance. That's
a pop culture reference.
It's some culture reference. I don't know if it made pop. So bands, what are we using? What is this about? Like a big band, light band? Tell the people.
Well, usually when it's on the internet, you get something that could move a tractor. You get a band that's as thick as possible, and you loop it through a 400-pound kettlebell, and you use your spine to swing it into place.
Yeah,
the idea behind this, I mean, when you look at, bands are useful in fitness. The way they're usually used with lifting is, let's say a bench press is a common application, right? You have your bands on the bench. One of the things they're good at is when you look at the range of motion of a bench press, it gets easier during lockout, right? As your arms are getting closer to straight, your muscles become, the whole lever system becomes more advantaged. Your muscles are in a better place. And that last little bit of lockout is almost non-existent for most people. So you can use a band to make rather than the force falling off right at the top of the bench press, you can make more force last longer throughout the lift. So we talked about in the last episode, this idea of raising the center of mass. It's a similar thing. You're making more of the lift harder. That's the way people usually use bands. And I don't know if people are trying to do this with kettlebells or not, but it's important to realize that when you stretch out a band, let's say you're standing on it, right? When you're just holding it into place at its length, there's no elasticity. It's just there. It's not
tight.
Hard. It's not going to be tight if you're just standing on it. If you haven't exceeded its resting length, there's no tension. Okay.
Gotcha.
So most of the time, if you're using a band that you can use for a swing, there's no tension on that bell when you're actually generating your swing. The kettlebell is going to be heavy between your feet. So at that portion, you're not going to be making the swing harder. So it's really important to think about with the band. And a lot of people seem to think that it does make the swing harder. It does not. As if
it's like a progression or something like that.
Exactly right. So that's not what we're talking about here. The idea is you got your swing up and away, and as the bell gets closer to the float, that's when you're creating that tension, and that tension is going to yank the bell back. Is it useful? Yes, it does put a little more. It does put a little more energy into the system. The things to watch out for, why I don't like this personally. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying it's not useful. But why I don't like it is, one, there's setup time. I don't want to have to anchor a band and do all this stuff because I don't find it any more valuable than, in fact, I find it less valuable than actually speeding up the eccentric on my own. You can stand on the band. That's a common way to do it, but then you're disrupting your ground contact, and that messes with force production. Is it a big deal? It may be. It may not be. But
I guess
it's
it depends
not something,
if you're going for a contest or something.
Sure. Well, I mean, when you look at just the general rules of force, your contact is really going to matter. And if you're changing your surface area, you're making that force a little more pinpoint. It can be problematic, and especially if your band is thick enough, it can disrupt your balance. Another thing I see is where you anchor the band changes the trajectory of the belt path. So when I see banded swings, it's very common that I see really short T-Rexy arms, and it seems to encourage an upper body lift. So I don't love the band for that. As I mentioned earlier, there's another variation if you have a partner, and it's called a spike swing. Very common when you are learning how to swing, and that's when you'd get someone who would stand next to you, and as the bell is moving into the float position, they'd spike it like a volleyball, and you push the bell back. So your partner is providing that extra energy, and then you have to deal with it. So that would be my preference, as long as you have a partner who understands how to modulate.
Yeah, I was going to say, they should probably know how to do kettlebell swings as well, because there's, you don't want to, if you go as hard as possible, that's a problem. You're going to blow that bell all the way through the back wall,
Sure. And you don't,
with it.
You also want to have a general idea of where the bell needs to go. If I'm pushing straight down and away, that's going to be problematic.
Pull you over.
versus down and back towards someone. So I prefer the spike swing. So the band can be useful. I'm not saying that it's not. It's just, for me, I don't think it's worth the effort. I think if you're going to use these, which I do think you should give them a shot if you've achieved proficiency, I think the using your own energy for as frequently as you're going to do it is probably the way to go. But who knows? Maybe the band swing is a great variation for you. And you may find it worthwhile. I haven't seen it in training. I haven't seen the band be worthwhile. It's one of those things that people teach you and talk about, and you learn about, like, oh yeah, that's cool. And then you never do it again.
It's like $1 worth of your paid entry fee for whatever you did. And I never used the band. I did when I started. I'm like, oh, let me try this. And I was like, yeah, this is a thing. I almost always, if I feel Like if my timing is off or something, or if I want to just kind of get a lot more power out of them, a lot more pop, then I'll just pull the bell back with my arms fast. And that's really intentional. And that's why we said it's not for the first day people, but it's there. Any other methods that you need to cover with doing the OverSpeed Eccentric, or does that pretty much cover all the aspects?
I think so. I mean, when we step back and we look at energy, it's either you can generate the energy or something outside of you can. So, outside of you, you have a friend or a band. And if it's you, then, you want to think about the lat, ideally, the arms pulling back towards your body. But, don't let it disrupt your timing or anything like that. But doing these cycles of swings, this is another way to increase your overall ability to generate force quickly. Often the kettlebell swing has a nice rhythm where you have a really strong, fast pop on the way up. And then on the way down, you're resting a little bit. You're letting, you did work on the bell. You're letting potential energy become kinetic energy and move that bell back down into the backswing. You get a little bit of a rest, right? But there's no rest here. You're just yanking it down. You're going through up, down, up, down, up, down, really intense cycles.
It's aggressive.
It is.
It's aggressive.
It's aggressive, but it's a very effective training tool. You just need to use it correctly. So
yeah, it might be useful to use like if you're starting out snatching and you're trying to figure out how to generate a lot more force to get that bell overhead. This is a great kind of gateway to start training that aspect of it as well. And is also what you said, that potential energy, you get that bell a little higher. That'll assist in that moment as well.
Yeah. Energy management is an important thing. So not only should you know what type of energy is happening at what point, but you want to think about what are you doing to manage that energy? What are you doing to conserve it? I don't remember where I heard this, and I think I've heard a version of it a couple times, but energy as it flows through your body, it flows through your bones. It's kind of like water flowing through riverbanks, right? And if you can contain those riverbanks, if you can contain that water, then great. But what happens if you get this, this roaring river, right? But your banks can't contain it. It spills over. That's when we start to get overuse injuries and things like that. Whether we get injured or not, if you have this really aggressive tug down on the swing and you're not good at the turnaround, if your soft tissues are not pliable and mobile, for lack of a better term, then you're putting all this energy into a system that can't really control it. So get really good at your backswing position. Make sure your stance is set. Make sure you're well balanced. When you are adding additional force, downward force to this swing, understand that your balance may be affected. Your technique may change. For me, when I do these, I find that I get a little hingier because I have to redirect the force. If it's straight down, it becomes a problem. I need to bring my torso forward more. Otherwise, I will physically and literally throw myself backwards. So you
feel those heels load up a lot more.
Exactly right. So when you feel those heels load up, that's all of your forces moving backwards. So in order to balance that extra backwards force, you need to take some of your mass and tip it forward. And that's why your torso will incline more. That's why your torso will become more parallel to the floor. So your technique may change. So you've got to be ready for these. Learn to handle the position. But if you're doing an OverSpeed Eccentric and you can't handle the basic positions of a swing, this is not right for you right now, unless you're doing it to find that extra pop in your swing. Because again, this can be a good beginner technique in very small doses and usually with supervision.
I was going to say recommended. I just used this on somebody 2 weeks ago, and I think I did one set. She did 2 swings. I did 3 spike swings in the middle. She did 2 more on her own. I said, there you go. You got it? And she's like, yeah, I got it. You know what I mean? She's a quick learner, obviously. But, these are the things. I like that analogy, Roger. And if you think of kettlebell swings as a river, nice and peaceful until you add that OverSpeed Eccentric, and then it's a rapid. And if your banks can't handle it, you're going to flood the town. And everybody will hate you for it.
Don't flood the town.
All right. Anything else?
One more thing, and I think just the general approach to this episode is it's great to look at individual techniques, but if you understand the principles behind those techniques, you can apply these to anything. So you can take the same concepts applied to the snatch. You can apply it to movement in general. So understanding how position channels energy. Your bones are a frame. When you go back to that elastic potential energy, I like to imagine a slingshot. Your bones are the uprights, and your muscles and your tendons are the band that you load the rock into if you're a slingshot. So if you can't get your bones in the right place, then your elasticity is going to be compromised. Let's say your bones are in the right place, but your soft tissue is not flexible. You're going to run into a problem. My point is that when you look at these things, don't just look at them as a specific example. Look at them in the bigger picture and think about, okay, this is not just all kettlebell training. This is movement. What are the big movement principles that I need to understand to answer my question? So if this question was, what is this good for? Who is it good for? Do I want to use it? Do I not want to use it? You can start to ask bigger questions and say, okay, well, what is this really doing? This is about energy. What phase? It's the downswing. Well, when is the downswing important? When I need to accept force. And you can start asking these questions. And when you get these answers, you apply this to, again, all kettlebell training, movement in general, which is why we do sometimes get comments from people who don't do kettlebell training at all, because they're learning about movement. They're looking at this in more of a big picture way, and they appreciate the principle, because once you understand the principle, the thing behind the thing, so to speak, you can apply that to lots of other stuff.
Touche. And that's why you can play a symphony on a piano and a violin, because once you understand the symphony, the implement doesn't matter. All right. Maybe that was a stretch. All right. That's it, everybody. Thanks for listening. Be sure to download the Bells app from the Apple App Store. And of course, we'll say it again. Leave us a comment. What do you want to hear our take on? How can we help you? Send it in a text. We definitely want to do this to benefit you and your needs as a kettlebell practitioner. So don't be shy. Only one of us bites. And you have to guess who. All right. Stay strong, everybody.
Bye, everybody.